Hi everyone, my name's Ethan. I'm 36, work as an operations manager at a logistics company, and for the past 10 years, I thought my marriage with Lisa was the kind of union people envied, steady, loving, and unshakable. Today, as I sit here typing this, I realize how fragile that illusion really was. It was a Thursday evening, and the light outside our apartment was fading into the pale orange of early dusk. The faint hum of traffic seeped through the partially open window, blending with the distant sound of children playing in the street below. Inside, everything seemed ordinary, the scent of fresh laundry mingling with the faint aroma of Lisa's perfume that lingered in the hallway. I was sitting at the kitchen table, laptop open, flipping through spreadsheets, trying to maintain a semblance of focus. She was in the living room, curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone. Lisa, 34, has always had this magnetic energy. She's charming, quick-witted, and possibly perceptive, at least on the surface. Tonight, however, there was a subtle difference. She laughed softly at something on her screen, her fingers tapping quickly, almost compulsively. I noticed the way her eyebrows flickered as she typed and how she glanced over her shoulder when I cleared my throat. Nothing overt, nothing that would raise alarm, but something about it made my stomach tighten ever so slightly. I reminded myself I was probably imagining things. I'd been working late, she had deadlines to meet. Maybe she was texting a friend about a project. But that unease lingered, like a faint chill creeping up my spine despite the warmth of the apartment. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that 10 years of marriage had taught me to trust her, to assume the best. Still, my eyes kept drifting toward her, catching the brief, almost imperceptible smiles she gave her phone. "What's so funny?" I asked, forcing a casual tone, though my heart was beating a little faster than usual. She looked up, startled, her smile faltering. "Oh, nothing," she said, setting the phone down a little too quickly. "Just a meme Mark sent me. You'd hate it anyway." Her tone was light, airy, almost dismissive, but something in it felt rehearsed. I nodded, trying to let it pass. "Right, of course." The evening settled into a familiar rhythm. I typed away at reports, the clicking of keys punctuating the quiet. Lisa hummed a tune softly, a song I didn't recognize, and sipped from a mug that smelled faintly of chamomile tea. The apartment felt small tonight, even though it was normally comfortable. Shadows stretched along the walls as the sun dipped lower, and the golden light from the street lamps outside cast long, uneven lines across the carpet. I noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her hands lingered over the phone, almost possessively. It was the kind of thing you could easily dismiss, I told myself. A long day, work, stress, maybe even a new hobby she hadn't told me about. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, just enough to make me hyper-aware, like a minor tremor beneath the surface of everything I thought I knew. Later, when she went to make tea, I noticed her phone buzz and the quick glance she gave it before tucking it under a cushion on the couch. Her lips curved ever so slightly into a smile, a private smile that didn't include me. My stomach twisted. I knew that face, I had seen it before in fleeting moments, subtle, clandestine. It was a smile meant for someone else. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it's just a work update, I thought. Maybe it's a funny message from a colleague. But even as I said it, the words sounded hollow in my mind. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust her completely. Yet, a small, nagging part of me whispered that something was off. And I hated that whisper, hated it because it refused to be ignored. The night wore on. I got up to refill my glass of water, and she looked up at me with that same bright, careful smile. "You've been at that all day," she said softly. "Don't you want to take a break?" I smiled back, a little too tight. Yeah, I should probably step away for a bit." I wandered into the living room, pretending to stretch, while my eyes subtly followed her movements. The way she adjusted the cushions, the way her fingers lingered over the mug, the almost imperceptible pause before checking her phone again, every micromotion felt loaded, pregnant with something I couldn't yet name. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't confrontation. It was smaller than that. It was quiet. A glance. A shift. A hesitation. And yet, it planted a seed in my mind, a seed that would grow into a gnawing doubt I couldn't shake. We went to bed later, the routine comforting yet hollow. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft sounds of the city through the window, the distant sirens and hum of cars blending into a lullaby I couldn't quite rest to. Lisa's breathing was steady beside me, but I found myself watching the rise and fall of her chest, every exhale reminding me that while she slept next to me, she might already be keeping secrets. I drifted in and out of sleep, the shadows of doubt stretching long and dark across my thoughts. And then it hit me like a whisper I couldn't ignore. What if the foundation I had trusted for 10 years wasn't as solid as I believed? What if the smiles, the late nights, the phone tucked under the cushion were signs I had been too blind to see? By the time morning arrived, the sunlight filtering softly through the blinds, I knew one thing with uncomfortable clarity: something had shifted. And I didn't yet know what. I tried to push it aside, make light of it over breakfast. "Morning," I said, pouring coffee and forcing a casual tone. "Morning," she replied, her smile warm and familiar, the kind that could still make my chest tighten, even now. But under it, I sensed a current, subtle, imperceptible, that made my stomach churn. I didn't yet know it, but this ordinary morning, this gentle light, the smell of coffee, the soft hum of the refrigerator, was the calm before the storm. And when that storm hit, nothing about our marriage would ever feel the same again. Because sometimes, the smallest gestures, a glance, a smile, a twitch of the fingers, can hide the loudest betrayals. And tonight, I would begin to see just how deep those betrayals ran. In this opening, the narrative establishes a psychological foundation of trust juxtaposed with subtle unease. Ethan's hyper-awareness of micro-expressions, gestures, and environmental cues conveys his internal tension while foreshadowing betrayal. The story's power lies in cinematic immersion, using sensory details, light, sound, smell, to make the audience feel both comfort and underlying suspicion. The narrative introduces the characters' traits and dynamics: Lisa as charismatic and emotionally complex, Ethan as trusting but increasingly doubtful. The subtle hints of secrecy, combined with Ethan's rationalization and denial, set up a slow-burning tension that primes the audience for the eventual confrontation. The next few weeks were strange. Not explosive, not obvious, just a slow, almost imperceptible erosion of the life I thought we shared. Every morning, I woke to the same routines, but tiny things began to feel off. Lisa's phone was never far from her, always face down, screen brightness dimmed, her thumbs scrolling with deliberate secrecy. She laughed at my jokes less often, smiled more at her messages, and sometimes, when I passed by her in the kitchen, she'd suddenly look away as if caught in a private world I wasn't invited to enter. I remember one evening vividly. I'd just gotten home from work, late because of a client issue that had stretched past 8. The apartment was unusually quiet. Usually she'd have music on or the TV murmuring something in the background. Tonight, nothing. The air smelled faintly of vanilla candles, but the scent was too deliberate, as if masking something else. I called out softly, "Lisa?" "Here," she answered from the bedroom, a little too quickly. She stepped out, hair slightly mussed, a twinge of redness in her cheeks, from exertion or embarrassment, I couldn't tell. She carried her laptop like a shield and gave me a small, careful smile. "Just finishing some work," she said. I nodded, but the words felt hollow. "Work?" I asked, trying not to sound accusatory, though the tone of my voice betrayed me. "Yes, work," she repeated, and then she laughed softly, a high, nervous trill that didn't reach her eyes. "You know how marketing deadlines can get." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust that there was nothing to see beyond the mundane stresses of her job. But as I moved past her to grab a water bottle, I caught the flash of her screen, a message notification from James. My throat went dry. I didn't know who James was, not yet, but the way she immediately minimized the chat and tucked the laptop under her arm made me freeze in the doorway. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the same orange light from the street lamps filtering through the blinds, thinking about every late night she'd spent working, every dinner she'd claimed to have with clients. I told myself I was imagining it. I was letting paranoia creep in. But the doubt had planted itself deep, and it would not be shaken so easily. Days passed, and the behavior escalated in subtle ways. Lisa started dressing differently when she left the house for evening work meetings, outfits she hadn't worn in years, hairstyles carefully arranged. Sometimes she'd leave abruptly, phone in hand, saying she was meeting a colleague for drinks, then return later than expected. Each time, I tried to tell myself it was normal. Professionals network, right? But the tightness in my chest told me it wasn't just networking. One Saturday, I was folding laundry when I noticed her phone light up on the living room table. She glanced at it quickly and snatched it away as if the screen had burned her fingers. Her smile lingered a fraction too long before she answered my question about lunch. I caught myself staring at her, memorizing the way she moved, the flicker of her eyes, the way she avoided my gaze. There was a rhythm forming, not just in her movements, but in the tension between us. A rhythm of secrecy. I tried to confront myself logically. Maybe I was overreacting. I told myself stories. She's stressed. She's getting validation from friends at work. Maybe she's just tired of routine. Each rationalization was a small comfort, a tiny dam holding back the flood of suspicion. And yet, every new gesture, every whispered laugh at her phone, chipped away at that dam. I noticed little things too, the way her perfume scent shifted subtly when she came back from meetings, the faint indentation of lipstick on the rim of her coffee mug, the occasional lingering smell of a cologne that wasn't mine. One evening, I found a receipt from an upscale restaurant I had never heard of, dated the night before, a night she claimed to have stayed late at the office. My stomach dropped. I shoved the receipt into my pocket, telling myself I'd ask her casually later, as if I had stumbled upon nothing at all. Then came the text messages. She'd glance at her phone with that secretive smile, fingers typing at lightning speed, sometimes laughing softly, sometimes pressing the phone against her chest. I began noticing patterns, late nights, sudden silences when I entered the room, a subtle tension in her jaw as if she were practicing restraint. I felt like an observer in my own home, a spectator to someone else's life. One night, she left to meet a client, and I stayed up, unable to sleep, listening to the faint hum of her car fading into the distance. I walked to the window and saw the streetlight glint off something metallic in her purse. She always took the same route home, but I noticed she lingered at intersections longer than necessary, sometimes taking small detours. I told myself I was reading too much into it, but my gut whispered a different story. It wasn't just the phone, the outfits, or the dinners. It was her energy, the way she moved through the apartment as if I wasn't there. The ease with which she deflected questions, the subtle micro-expressions, a twitch of her lip, a delayed response, a distracted gaze, all formed a pattern my mind couldn't ignore. Something was happening beyond the surface of our marriage, and the quiet dread gnawed at me. One night, I remember standing by the doorway, watching her text on the couch. The room smelled faintly of lavender, her hair catching the soft lamplight, her fingers moving rapidly over the screen. A flash of guilt, maybe fear, flickered across her face, but she quickly masked it with a practiced smile. I wanted to confront her, to demand the truth, but I was paralyzed by doubt. What if I was wrong? What if my suspicion was baseless, a betrayal of trust in itself? And yet, intuition is a cruelly persistent thing. It whispers, it scratches at the corners of your mind, and it will not be silenced. I began noticing more anomalies, deleted call logs, mysterious calendar entries, vague explanations for unusual behavior. The cumulative weight of small inconsistencies, the quiet avoidance, the secretive gestures, the sudden attention to appearance, pressed down on me. One evening, Mark, my best friend, called unexpectedly. "Ethan, are you okay? You sound tense," he said over the line. I laughed nervously, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, just work, you know how it is." But Mark didn't sound convinced. "I'll swing by tomorrow," he said. "Sometimes you need someone else around." I agreed, but even as I hung up, the gnawing feeling inside me didn't ease. Lisa went about her evening routine, humming softly, phone tucked under her arm, laughter spilling in controlled bursts. I realized with sudden clarity that the life I thought I knew was quietly fracturing. And I didn't yet know how deep the cracks went. The breaking point hadn't arrived, but the tension was unmistakable. Every gesture, every hidden glance, every carefully timed laugh was a breadcrumb leading toward a truth I wasn't ready to face. My trust and my intuition were colliding, and I felt like I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't yet see. And then, a single image arrived the next day, a photograph sent by Mark, innocently, with no explanation. It showed Lisa at a restaurant I didn't recognize, sitting across from a man whose face I didn't know, laughing in a way that wasn't meant for me. My chest tightened, breath caught, and for a moment, the room spun around me. That photograph didn't answer questions, it created them. Who was he? Why was she there? And most dangerously, what had I been blind to all these months? I stared at the photo long after Mark left, the hum of the refrigerator and the distant city sounds blending into a low, tense background. My mind raced, connecting dots I wasn't sure existed, trying to rationalize, to explain, to deny. But deep inside, I felt it, the first undeniable hint that my marriage was not what it seemed. That the foundation I had trusted for 10 years was quietly cracking. I folded the photograph carefully, placing it face down on the kitchen table. I told myself I would wait, observe, gather evidence, but in that moment, I realized my life, the one I thought was ordinary, safe, secure, had changed forever. The quiet suspicion had grown into a gnawing certainty, and nothing would ever feel the same again. In this section, psychological tension escalates as subtle behavioral shifts signal potential betrayal. Lisa's actions, secretive phone use, altered routines, late nights, and gestures of avoidance, create cognitive dissonance for Ethan, forcing him to oscillate between denial and suspicion. The narrative emphasizes micro-expressions, environmental cues, and sensory details to immerse the audience in Ethan's growing unease. The introduction of Mark and the photograph functions as the first concrete external clue, pushing Ethan from intuitive doubt into the first stages of investigative thinking. The story illustrates the psychological weight of uncertainty in intimate relationships, highlighting how small anomalies accumulate into a compelling, if still incomplete, picture of betrayal. The photograph Mark had sent lingered in my mind like a stain I couldn't wash away. I replayed it over and over, scrutinized every detail, the angle of the table, the shadows under the man's chin, the way Lisa's hand rested against her cheek, the curve of her smile that felt alien. I had spent a decade trusting her, believing in the stability of our marriage. And yet, here it was, a tiny window into a life that I wasn't part of, a life hidden behind carefully curated appearances. The next morning, I found myself lingering over my coffee longer than usual, staring at my laptop screen while emails went unanswered. My usual focus was gone, replaced by an obsessive curiosity that gnawed at me. I couldn't confront Lisa yet, not without proof, but I needed answers. I began to track patterns, noting her late nights, the times she left the apartment, the phone calls she made that she suddenly ended when I walked past. I told myself it was wrong, that I was invading her privacy, but the voice in my head demanding clarity was louder than any moral hesitation. One evening, while she was in the shower, I picked up her phone resting on the kitchen counter. My heart pounded as I unlocked it with the pin she sometimes left unguarded. It felt like holding a live wire, dangerous, electric, charged with a sense of impending revelation. There were messages, innocuous at first, a few from colleagues about work deadlines. Then came subtle flirtations, jokes, emojis, lines that seemed harmless but hinted at intimacy. My hands shook as I scrolled, scanning timestamps, delete notifications, and locations tagged in passing. My mind spun with questions. Was I reading too much into casual banter, or was this the tip of a hidden iceberg? The next week became a blur of observation. I started noting her departures, which roads she took, whether she returned at predictable times, even her choice of music in the car. I followed her discreetly once, keeping to the shadows, heart hammering in my chest as she stopped at a restaurant I didn't recognize. I lingered a few blocks away, watching through the tinted windows as she greeted someone with a familiarity I had never seen directed at me. My stomach churned, but I couldn't look away. I wanted to confront her. I wanted to demand the truth. But every fiber of my being feared the confirmation I already suspected. So I collected evidence quietly, receipts, photos, locations, times. Each small discovery sharpened the outline of betrayal while simultaneously fracturing my sense of trust. There were moments of false reassurance. One evening, she mentioned a work presentation, showing me slides and emails, smiling as though nothing was amiss. I wanted to believe her. I even felt a fleeting relief. But intuition is patient and unyielding. It waits for your guard to drop before whispering that all is not as it seems. Late at night, I lay in bed awake, listening to the distant hum of the city, trying to make sense of the contradictions. I recalled every instance when I had brushed off unease, every subtle dismissal of my own instincts. The realization settled in like ice in my veins. My marriage had become a puzzle I wasn't allowed to see, and the missing pieces were deliberately hidden. Then came the moment that made everything concrete. Another photograph arrived, this one unsolicited from Mark, showing Lisa laughing across from a man I now recognized, James, her colleague. The casual intimacy in their posture, the way he leaned in slightly while she mirrored him, the visible ease of their connection, it was undeniable. My throat tightened. This wasn't speculation. This wasn't paranoia. This was real. I confronted my own morality. Was it right to spy, to follow, to dig into her private life? Could I reconcile love with suspicion? Each action felt like a betrayal in itself, yet inaction was a slow poison. I rationalized, I wasn't the instigator, only the observer of a truth being deliberately concealed from me. The days that followed were a blur of hyper-awareness. I noticed deleted call logs, subtle shifts in her schedule, and conversations that seemed carefully edited for my benefit. Even when she spoke to me directly, her eyes darted subtly, fingers fidgeted, and the warmth I had once relied on in her voice now felt filtered, distant. Every glance at her was a gamble, a chance to see a fleeting truth, or to convince myself once more that I was imagining it. There were also red herrings. A couple of times, I misinterpreted innocent messages or misread casual greetings as signals. Relief would flood me, only to be replaced by renewed suspicion when new evidence appeared. My emotions oscillated rapidly, anger, guilt, fear, hope, and despair intermingled in a dizzying mix. Sleep became elusive. Meals were mechanical. The apartment, our home, felt cold, alien, and charged with unspoken tension. I began recording details obsessively, the time she left, what she wore, the receipt she brought back, snippets of conversation. I mapped patterns like a detective, assembling a case I wasn't sure I wanted to prosecute. Each discovery brought a mix of satisfaction and dread. I was closing in on the truth, but with each step, the clarity of betrayal weighed heavier on my conscience. And then, the final clue before confrontation arrived almost accidentally. I noticed her wedding ring, which she always wore, subtly moved, a mark of conscious or unconscious preparation. The realization hit me like a freight train. This wasn't a brief lapse, a momentary flirtation, or a misjudgment. This was months of deception. Months of intimacy hidden behind carefully constructed lies. The full weight of the affair, emotional, physical, psychological, had yet to reveal itself, but I now knew I could not ignore it. Every observation, every careful note, every hidden photograph had brought me here, to the point where the illusion of normalcy shattered under the relentless pressure of evidence. I had crossed a threshold. From doubt, I had moved into action. And with action came responsibility, the responsibility to face the truth, to confront the betrayal, and to decide the fate of everything I had once believed unbreakable. I spent the next day rehearsing conversations in my head, imagining her responses, the lies she might tell, the half-truths she might offer. I felt both dread and resolve, a simultaneous desire to preserve what remained of her love and a need to dismantle the lies she had spun. By evening, I had made a decision: would not confront her blindly, I would not yell or scream. I would reveal the truth in a way that could not be ignored, a methodical exposure that would leave no room for deception or deflection. As I prepared mentally, gathering both the physical evidence and the emotional strength I would need, a cold clarity settled in. Betrayal is never just an event. It is a web, intricate and pervasive, that entangles everyone in its path. And once you see it, once you feel its threads against your skin, you cannot unsee, you cannot unfeel, and you must act. The moment of confrontation was approaching. The photograph of Lisa and James, the notes, the receipts, the hours of observation, all of it had converged into an inevitable truth. And though I didn't yet know how she would respond, or what the ultimate fallout would be, I knew one thing with certainty: from here, everything would change. Ethan's transition from suspicion to active investigation illustrates the psychological toll of uncertainty and betrayal. His moral conflict, observing Lisa without consent, reflects the tension between love, trust, and the need for truth. Red herrings highlight the complexity of interpreting subtle cues in human behavior, while the accumulation of sensory details and microexpressions amplifies suspense. The narrative emphasizes cognitive strain, insomnia, and hyper-awareness, showing how prolonged suspicion fractures perception. The arrival of incontrovertible evidence, photos of Lisa with James, forces Ethan into a state of resolved determination, marking the point where passive doubt becomes active confrontation, and the trajectory toward irreversible betrayal is set. The evening air was thick with the scent of rain-damp streets as I parked a few blocks from the restaurant. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, a mixture of anticipation and dread coiling in my stomach. I had rehearsed this moment countless times in my head, imagining her reactions, the lies she might offer, the excuses she might cling to. But now that it had arrived, the weight of reality felt heavier than any rehearsal. I watched through the rain-streaked window as she approached the table, laughing lightly at some comment from James. Her hair glistened under the streetlights, a careless elegance I had once found comforting, now sharpened into a cruel reminder of what I might lose. James leaned in, voice low, confident. Lisa mirrored his posture, her laughter light, flirtatious, intimate. Each gesture was a strike against the world I had believed in for 10 years. I held the small box in my pocket, the symbol of the life we had built together, the ring I had given her on a sunlit afternoon over a decade ago. I had decided to use it, not as a weapon of revenge, but as undeniable proof that she had violated the bond we shared. The ring would speak when words could not, delivering clarity in a world of shadows and half-truths. When they were mid-conversation, I stepped inside, feeling the muted warmth of the restaurant envelop me. The hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, the subtle aroma of roasted meats and wine, everything seemed heightened, sharper, more cinematic. I approached the waiter, requesting a discreet delivery, a small box to the table occupied by Lisa and James. My heart hammered, the sound of my own breathing felt deafening in my ears. Moments later, the waiter returned, a small, polite nod, and I stepped back into the corner of the room. I watched, hidden yet exposed in my own anxiety, as the box was placed on the table. Lisa's smile faltered for just an instant, replaced by a twitch of confusion. James's brow furrowed. Then recognition, sharp, immediate, washed over her features. Her hand froze mid-gesture, eyes widening, and I saw it, a fleeting panic, a crack in the facade she had carefully maintained. I felt my chest tighten, not with triumph, but with an odd, detached sorrow. The betrayal was no longer hypothetical. It was tangible, displayed in the sharp intake of her breath, the subtle recoil in her posture, the sudden awareness that the illusion she had curated for months, for years, had been undone in one deliberate gesture. When she finally looked toward the entrance, her gaze met mine. There was a hesitation, a flicker of something unspoken, and then she saw the rage, the heartbreak, the controlled detachment etched across my face. I didn't move. I didn't speak. The silence became a kind of accusation, a weight pressing down on the table between them. James attempted a smile, fumbling for words, but his confidence wavered under the gravity of the moment. Lisa opened her mouth, perhaps to lie, to rationalize, to explain, but no words came. The ring sat between them, gleaming under the restaurant light, a mirror of the vows she had once promised to honor, now transformed into a symbol of exposure. Later, we would have the conversation, the confessions, the tears. But in that instant, it was the stillness that spoke most clearly. The world outside continued, oblivious, while inside that restaurant, time slowed. I observed every detail, the tension in her shoulders, the tight grip of her napkin, the subtle tremor in her hands. The intimacy with James, casual, light-hearted before, now seemed grotesque, a violation laid bare. Once the initial shock settled, I approached the table. I spoke, carefully measured, my voice low but firm. "Lisa, we need to talk." She tried to respond, but her eyes betrayed her, the guilt, the fear, the regret all flashing like strobe lights in a storm. James excused himself, muttering something about another meeting, leaving us alone. For the first time in months, maybe years, the truth was unavoidable. I laid out everything, the photographs, the receipts, the timeline I had painstakingly assembled. I described my observations, my doubts, and the evidence I had collected. Each word carried the weight of betrayal, but also the precision of someone unwilling to be swayed by excuses or deception. She listened, head bowed, fingers twisting nervously. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. She confessed, the affair, emotional and physical, stretched across months, intertwined with moments of insecurity, validation-seeking, and an inability to confront her own loneliness. She explained James, her rationalizations, the late nights at work. She cried, sought forgiveness, offered apologies that rang hollow against the backdrop of reality. I remained composed, restrained. The anger was present, simmering beneath the surface, but it was tempered by clarity. The love I had once felt could no longer coexist with the betrayal I had witnessed. I realized, with painful precision, that forgiveness was not enough to restore what had been broken. Trust, once shattered, cannot be rebuilt with words alone. We left the restaurant separately. The drive home was silent, the city lights blurring past, each red and yellow glow a reminder of warning signs ignored. Back at the apartment, I noticed details I had overlooked before, the scent of perfume lingering on her scarf, the empty chair at the table, the subtle disarray of cushions on the couch. Everything was a testament to absence, to concealment, to the fracture now embedded in our lives. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail. Betrayal is a slow, invasive poison. It infiltrates memory, perception, and expectation. I felt a strange duality, sorrow for the loss of what we had, and resolve in the recognition that I could not remain tethered to deceit. The confrontation had stripped away illusions, leaving a stark landscape of truth. In the days that followed, conversations with Lisa became a careful negotiation of honesty and regret. She spoke of remorse, desire to repair, and acknowledgement of mistakes. I listened, measuring every word, weighing intentions against actions. Each gesture, each phrase, was scrutinized, yet nothing could erase the certainty that had taken root in my mind: the affair was real, her deception deliberate, and the integrity of our marriage irreparably compromised. I realized that clarity came not from anger, not from revenge, but from observation, patience, and moral alignment. The act of confrontation, methodical and deliberate, was my bridge from doubt to understanding. I had witnessed the full spectrum of betrayal, and in doing so, I had prepared myself to make decisions informed not by impulse, but by truth. That night marked a point of no return. The illusions were gone. The web of secrecy unraveled before me, exposing not only Lisa's actions but the vulnerabilities in our shared life that I had ignored. I understood, with painful exactness, that moving forward would require boundaries, separation, and a reconstruction of identity, for both of us, in different forms. The confrontation was complete, but the emotional aftermath had only just begun. And in that stillness, I felt the first stirrings of what would become resolve, a quiet, unyielding recognition that while love can be betrayed, self-respect and clarity remain untouchable. The confrontation is the apex of psychological tension and emotional exposure. Ethan's meticulous planning to expose Lisa reflects his need for certainty and moral clarity, showing the interplay between justice and restraint. The restaurant setting amplifies sensory realism, the scent, lighting, and background noise all heighten tension. Lisa's initial shock, partial confession, and emotional display reveal the complexity of human guilt and remorse. Ethan's restrained response demonstrates emotional intelligence. He prioritizes clarity over vengeance, observation over reaction, and prepares mentally for the next phase, separation and personal empowerment. The narrative highlights the irreversible fracture of trust and the profound impact of uncovering deliberate deception. The apartment felt impossibly quiet after the confrontation, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for the next act of inevitability. Lisa had left for the night, carrying with her the weight of her confession and the residual tension that hung in the air. I sat on the edge of the sofa, the soft upholstery pressing against my palms, and felt the strange combination of exhaustion and clarity settle over me. Every detail of the evening replayed in my mind: the restaurant, the ring, the frozen look on her face, the awkward withdrawal of James, and with each memory, the realization crystallized: our marriage, as it had been, was no longer viable. Morning light seeped through the blinds, sharp and impartial, illuminating the subtle disorder of the apartment. Cushions still askew, her mug from the previous evening lingering on the counter, the faint scent of her perfume still in the air, each was a reminder of absence, of deception, of decisions that could not be undone. I moved deliberately, methodically, almost mechanically, gathering the scattered pieces of our life together in my mind. There was no screaming, no dramatic collapse, only a quiet reckoning. I called Mark first, needing the grounding presence of a friend who had been unexpectedly involved in this ordeal. He listened without interruption, absorbing the story, offering practical advice interlaced with the kind of loyalty and calm only a longtime friend could provide. "You're doing the right thing by staying true to yourself," he said. His words, simple and grounded, felt like an anchor. There was no encouragement of revenge, no indulgence in vindictive fantasies, only acknowledgement of the reality and support for measured action. I began the process of defining boundaries. The wedding ring, once a symbol of shared vows, was carefully placed in a small box on the dresser. I didn't throw it, smash it, or weaponize it. It was a symbol of acknowledgement, of the life that had been and the understanding that it could not continue in its previous form. My own personal space, the apartment, the bedroom, the routines I had taken for granted, suddenly became arenas of control, where I could reclaim agency over my life and decisions. Lisa attempted contact the next day. Texts came first, hesitant and clipped, then a phone call in the late afternoon. I let the phone ring once, twice, and then placed it down. My response, when it finally came, was measured. We spoke in neutral terms, addressing logistics, who would handle bills, how the separation would be executed, and the timeline for her moving out. Her voice wavered, emotional appeals interwoven with pleas for reconciliation, but I held steady. Empathy did not mean surrender. Acknowledgement of her remorse did not equate to erasing the breach of trust. In the days that followed, I began to reclaim routines that had felt routine but now were charged with the weight of independence. Mornings began with quiet coffee on the balcony, the sunlight warming my hands as I observed the city awakening below. I noticed the little things I had missed before: the smell of rain on concrete, the distant hum of traffic, the crisp tang of morning air. Even mundane tasks, folding laundry, organizing my workspace, making lists for the week, carried a new significance, each a small act of control in a world that had suddenly shifted. Emotionally, the fracture created a duality. There was grief, sharp, insistent, a persistent ache, for the loss of intimacy, the betrayal, and the life I had imagined. Yet there was also clarity, a sense of liberation intertwined with the pain. I realized that trust, once irrevocably broken, cannot be patched with apologies or rationalizations. The emotional separation was as crucial as the physical. Without it, reconciliation would have been a dangerous illusion. Conversations with Lisa became sporadic, functional, necessary for the execution of the separation. Each interaction was an exercise in restraint, listening without responding impulsively, acknowledging her words without granting them power to alter my boundaries. She expressed regret, sometimes shame, occasionally despair, but I noticed that the emotional intensity no longer swayed me. My responses were deliberate, concise, measured, and protective of my own stability. Friends and colleagues became vital touchstones. Mark, especially, was a steady presence. Occasionally, he would visit, and we would sit quietly, sharing meals or long walks, speaking intermittently about work, life, or nothing at all. In those moments, the normalcy of friendship, uncomplicated, loyal, grounding, became a balm against the turbulence of betrayal. I recognized the importance of external support networks, people whose perspectives and constancy could counterbalance the internal chaos I was navigating. Financial and legal considerations loomed, but I approached them with the same meticulousness I had applied during the confrontation. Documents were organized, accounts reviewed, plans drawn for equitable separation. Each procedural step reinforced a sense of control and personal agency. While emotional bonds had frayed, practical control over my life provided a structure upon which to rebuild. The most profound shift, however, was internal. I began to notice subtle changes in my thought patterns, a recalibration of emotional responses. I no longer sought validation from Lisa. I no longer felt the compulsion to rationalize her actions or forgive prematurely. Instead, I observed, analyzed, and responded from a place of self-alignment. Decisions were informed by principles rather than impulse, by understanding rather than reaction. Even moments of anger or sadness were contextualized within a broader framework of personal growth and boundary setting. One evening, as the city lights shimmered on rain-slick streets, I realized that a profound clarity had settled in. The betrayal, though painful, had catalyzed an internal reordering. Emotional resilience, independence, and self-respect had begun to take root. I could grieve without being consumed, reflect without being paralyzed, and plan without being burdened by unresolved attachment. The day Lisa moved out was quiet. I helped with the logistics in a practical, measured way. Her car disappeared down the street, leaving a faint echo in its wake. The apartment, now hers partially empty, felt different, lighter, cleaner, less cluttered by the weight of shared deception. I sat in the empty kitchen, the quiet humming of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of the city my only companions. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of undisturbed presence, a recognition that I could inhabit my own life fully, without the constant undercurrent of suspicion or betrayal. That night, I removed the last personal mementos connected exclusively to Lisa, photographs, trinkets, tokens of our shared past. Each act was a small reclamation, a quiet but deliberate assertion of autonomy. The process was neither violent nor dramatic, it was practical, introspective, and resolute. Through it, I internalized a crucial lesson: love without trust is unsustainable, and betrayal, while destructive, can catalyze personal growth when met with clarity and decisiveness. I slept alone for the first time in years, the cool sheets a comfort rather than a reminder of absence. Morning light filtered through the blinds, illuminating a room cleared of illusions. I felt a subtle pride, a quiet empowerment that had been absent in the months leading to discovery. The emotional landscape had shifted, grief remained, but it was accompanied by strength, perspective, and the beginnings of self-directed purpose. In the ensuing weeks, I began exploring routines and hobbies previously neglected. Evening walks, focused work on professional projects, and reconnecting with old friends filled the spaces that once carried anxiety, doubt, and suspicion. The transformation was gradual but tangible: emotional resilience, personal clarity, and a renewed sense of self-worth. While Lisa remained a figure in the periphery, a reminder of betrayal and lessons learned, I no longer allowed her presence, literal or emotional, to dictate my state of mind. The confrontation had ended the illusions, the fallout and deliberate decisions had reclaimed autonomy. I realized that while the past could not be changed, the future remained entirely within my grasp, shaped by clarity, boundaries, and self-respect. The chapter of our marriage had closed, but a new one, defined by personal empowerment, emotional independence, and deliberate presence, had begun. The pain of betrayal lingered, but it was accompanied by an understanding that personal agency, once reclaimed, could serve as a foundation for growth, resilience, and, eventually, peace. Ethan demonstrates psychological resilience, transforming grief into clarity and action. By focusing on routines, boundaries, and personal autonomy, he rebuilds a sense of self that betrayal had threatened to dismantle. The narrative emphasizes the importance of measured decisions, external support networks, and internal reflection. It also illustrates the distinction between empathy and attachment. Acknowledging Lisa's remorse without allowing it to influence personal boundaries underscores his emotional growth. Practical and psychological control coalesce, preparing Ethan for the final stage of full resolution and long-term empowerment. The apartment, now fully my own, carried a quiet sense of order I hadn't felt in years. The absence of Lisa was palpable, but rather than emptiness, it brought a strange clarity, as though the air itself had shifted to make room for something new. Morning sunlight streamed through the blinds, brushing across the floor with a golden softness that seemed to illuminate not just the room, but my thoughts, my priorities, and my resolve. I breathed deeply, savoring the scent of freshly brewed coffee, the faint aroma of rain lingering from the night before, and the faint hum of life outside, sounds that felt grounded and real, not intrusive. For the first time in a long while, I had the luxury of moving through my day without the nagging tension of suspicion or the weight of unanswered questions. Each routine, from making breakfast to organizing work emails, became an act of self-possession. Even mundane chores, folding laundry or wiping down countertops, felt imbued with intention, a reflection of the care I was taking to reclaim not just my space, but my mental and emotional life. Small victories, unnoticed by anyone but myself, reinforced that I was capable of building stability out of chaos. Social connections took on renewed importance. I began spending evenings with Mark, reconnecting with friends I had drifted from during the emotional turbulence of the past months. Conversation was easy, grounded, and unforced, the kind of companionship that nurtures rather than demands, that restores confidence instead of eroding it. With each interaction, I was reminded that life did not end with betrayal, that trust, though broken in one context, could be rebuilt in new forms, with friends, colleagues, and eventually, within myself. My professional life became another anchor. Immersing myself in projects and responsibilities at the logistics company brought focus and satisfaction. Each task completed, each decision made independently, reinforced my growing sense of agency. I realized that empowerment was not a sudden revelation but a series of deliberate, consistent acts, small steps taken daily that cumulatively created a life no longer defined by the shadow of Lisa's choices. Emotionally, the transformation was profound. The pain of betrayal remained, of course, a lingering ache, a quiet echo of loss. Yet it no longer dictated my mood or actions. The emotional spectrum expanded to include resilience, acceptance, and even gratitude for the clarity that adversity had forced. I could feel sadness without being consumed, reflect on the past without longing, and plan for the future without hesitation. I understood that betrayal is a fracture, yes, but fractures can also create new space for growth, self-awareness, and independence. I established clear boundaries regarding Lisa. Minimal contact, necessary communication restricted to practical matters, and avoidance of emotionally charged discussions allowed me to protect the fragile equilibrium I had begun to cultivate. Her attempts at reconciliation or expressions of remorse no longer influenced my decisions. I listened, acknowledged, and maintained a distance that preserved my autonomy. The detachment was not cold or cruel, it was protective, a deliberate act of self-care rooted in the lessons of betrayal. Personal growth manifested in symbolic acts as well. I redecorated parts of the apartment, removing objects and photographs tied to the past, introducing new colors, textures, and arrangements that reflected my own tastes and priorities. The space became a reflection of the person I was reclaiming, deliberate, confident, and self-directed. Each choice reinforced the psychological shift, a tangible affirmation that life could continue, even thrive, after profound emotional disruption. Evenings became moments of introspection. I would sit by the window with a notebook, recording thoughts, aspirations, and reflections. Sometimes I revisited the timeline of events, the subtle signs, the phone screens glimpsed in passing, the photograph Mark had sent, not to obsess but to understand, to recognize patterns, and to acknowledge my own blind spots. Awareness became a tool, equipping me to avoid repeating mistakes, to cultivate healthier relationships, and to trust wisely in the future. The city outside was alive, indifferent to personal drama, yet full of possibility. I began exploring neighborhoods I had never visited, cafes I had never entered, and parks I had never walked through. Each excursion, simple and solitary, became an act of reclaiming autonomy. I noticed the scent of freshly baked bread, the crunch of gravel underfoot, the texture of cool metal handrails, sensory details that reminded me of presence, grounding me in a world that existed independently of betrayal. Sleep became restorative again. Alone in my bed, the sheets cool and comforting, I drifted without anxiety, without imagined confrontations or replayed conversations. The quiet of the apartment no longer felt oppressive, it felt safe, supportive, and even liberating. Dreams were vivid but no longer haunting, reflecting both the past and the potential of a self-directed future. Over time, I began to think about relationships differently. I understood that love without trust is unsustainable and that emotional honesty must be mutual to be meaningful. The lessons from Lisa's betrayal were harsh but instructive: vigilance in emotional boundaries, openness tempered by discernment, and the necessity of prioritizing one's own mental and emotional well-being. I realized that empowerment does not mean isolation, it means choosing connections that enhance rather than diminish personal integrity. Weeks turned into months, and the patterns of autonomy solidified. I immersed myself in professional growth, personal hobbies, and genuine friendships. Each day reinforced that life continues beyond betrayal, that self-respect and clarity are as vital as intimacy, and that recovery is not linear but cumulative, a series of small victories compounding into resilience. One quiet evening, as I watched rain streak the apartment window, I reflected on the journey. Betrayal had shattered my illusions, but it had also illuminated truths, about myself, about trust, and about the nature of human relationships. I felt sorrow, yes, but it was tempered by clarity, calm, and an awareness of my own strength. Life had offered me a crucible, painful, unavoidable, transformative, and I had emerged capable of navigating it with discernment and dignity. The chapter with Lisa was closed. Divorce proceedings formalized the separation, a necessary step but not an emotional climax. The resolution was internal, the reclamation of agency, the establishment of boundaries, and the cultivation of self-respect. Every action, from reorganizing my home to reconnecting with friends, reinforced the principle that while love can be betrayed, self-worth is inviolable. For the first time in years, I felt entirely myself. The past, with all its heartbreak and disillusionment, had become context rather than constraint. I could move forward, fully aware of vulnerability but fortified by experience. I was no longer defined by betrayal, I was defined by the deliberate choices I made in response to it. And so, life continued, measured, intentional, and profoundly mine. The apartment was quiet, the city alive, and I awake to the realization that growth often comes through fracture, that clarity often follows chaos, and that emotional autonomy is not a destination but an ongoing practice. The past shaped me, yes, but it no longer confined me. This concluding section emphasizes full emotional and psychological resolution. Ethan achieves self-empowerment through deliberate routines, personal boundaries, social reconnection, and introspection. The narrative underscores the transformative potential of betrayal. Grief catalyzes clarity, loss creates space for growth, and autonomy becomes a source of resilience. Sensory immersion reinforces the psychological shift, illustrating presence, control, and mindfulness. Lessons learned include prioritizing trust, maintaining boundaries, and valuing self-worth over relational attachment. Ultimately, Ethan emerges stronger, capable of navigating future relationships with discernment and confidence.